With increasing frequency, Republicans are facing questions about their party's association, planned or otherwise, with what is commonly known as, quote, the Great Replacement Theory, this following Saturday's racist massacre in Buffalo, New York. This theory essentially argues that minorities and or immigrants are usurping white people of their political and economic primacy in Western society. It is what allegedly drove Peyton Gendron to fatally shoot 10 black people and injure 3 others at a supermarket in Buffalo just days ago. Authorities believe Gendron wrote several pages asserting racist rhetoric that was posted online before this shooting. Joining us now is Nicholas Confessore. He is a political and investigative reporter for the New York Times. The Times recently published a series of articles that he wrote detailing Tucker Carlson's rise in cable news through promulgating ideas near or very close to this great replacement theory. Nicholas, it's great to have you with us. Tell the audience, what was the genesis of these articles? And I want to stress to the audience, this is not a single profile on a prominent person. You see that in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal all the time. This is a series of articles about a person and the rise of a particular framing of what is happening in America, the audience it attracts, and the reason that those two things must be studied carefully. What's the genesis of all this, Nick?
Well, that's how I put it, too. I mean, this is an important figure in cable news, of course. Tucker Carlson has the top-rated show in primetime cable, but he is also an influential figure. And his journey to versions of these ideas, his journey from one kind of conservatism to the post-Trump kind of conservatism, is really the journey of conservative politics over the same period. It kind of helps us explain how we got to where we are today. And you can't understand the MAGA movement without understanding how Carlson became a part of it.
And is this something where the grievance existed long before, it just didn't have a cable news spokesperson, and now it does? Or did Tucker Carlson become a spokesperson for something that he was, as he was speaking about it, creating?
I think Carlson comes by his beliefs authentically for the most part, but then he also entered a network, Fox News, which is extraordinarily good at programming and ratings. And once in that environment, he was incentivized, according to our reporting, to lean into the material that would light up viewers the most, crank the dial of fear and anger the most, and connect with the Trump audience that was becoming so important to Fox, principally older and white viewers. And what he found in the course of his show over several years was that by dipping into this well of far-right ideas, some of them white nationalist ideas, and sanding them down of some of the more obvious elements, making them more palatable, he could find material that would light up the audience, bring in huge ratings, and tap into that broader fear that we're all familiar with, of people who are afraid that American culture is being trampled upon, that people who are arriving who are new aren't going to share the same values. He found a way to light up that fear and translate it into revenue and ratings.
Nick, and I want to be careful here, because you can be an American who lives in a place where fentanyl is a crisis, or where you're seeing some immigrant communities in your neighborhood, and you may have some general questions about that. You may say, I'm an advocate for border security. That doesn't necessarily mean or even suggest that you're a great replacement theory advocate or you harbor particularly virulent racist ideas. We want to be clear about that. But there is something else going on here, and it's a kind of a mainstreaming of these thoughts that you mentioned just a second ago, used to be fringe, but are somehow showing up intentionally or otherwise in Republican rhetoric. I want to play a clip of some Republicans in prominent positions getting close to embracing this particular theory. Let's take a listen.
Appears to them as we're replacing national-born American, native-born Americans to permanently transform the political landscape.
Is it really they want to remake the demographics of America to ensure that they stay in power forever?
They can't win re-election in 2022 unless they bring in a large number of new voters to replace the voters that are already here. That's what this is about. We have an invasion in this country.
So, Nick, what are the key words here? I imagine invasion is one. Replace. or the sense of some sort of demographic onslaught? Those are the kind of things to perk our ears up for.
That's right. And in that last statement you heard that somehow the Democrats are trying to bring in a new class of voters in time to win this fall, in a few months, which is just a preposterous idea on its face, that you could even pull it off if you wanted to, especially from a party that in the last election actually won the election without so-called help. So look, I think you were right to say earlier, this country has had a debate about immigration for a long time, in some ways for its entire existence. And it's not unreasonable to say, I think people who come into the country should have permission, or that immigration policy should work for the people who live here now, who are citizens now. Fentanyl is a huge problem. What we see in this rhetoric, though, and on Carlson's show on Fox, is wholly different. It says that these problems are actually created on purpose and deliberately by a shadowy cabal, the ruling class, as he calls it. And in his telling, if you watch the show and watch it over and over again, as many viewers do, and as our team did for this story, he repeats these ideas over and over again. They, the ruling class, hate you, loathe you, and want to destroy you. I'm not paraphrasing. He uses that kind of language all the time. So we've gone from a discussion of a hard and intractable policy problem to a conspiracy theory about how elites are engineering this whole thing to destroy America. And that's what's so potent and toxic.
Potent and toxic are key words, and we have history to look back on when this kind of rhetoric is used and weaponized in a political context. Do we not?
Yes, exactly. So when this project started for me, there had already been 3 mass shootings in recent years in El Paso at a Walmart where a gunman targeted Mexicans, in his own words, at a synagogue in Pittsburgh where the killer targeted Jews for their role, as he saw it, in this conspiracy theory of engineering replacement. And of course, tragically, a few days after the story was published, we had yet another example of the potency and danger of these ideas when a man in Buffalo walked into a supermarket to kill black people. And the important thing is, in one case, the targets were black people. In a different case, the targets were Jewish Americans. In a third case, Hispanics and Mexicans who were in the U.S. But the same theory connects all of them, that they are all part of a plot to destroy America, which is a really insightful idea.
And Nick, if you look at the results, just say, for example, in yesterday's Pennsylvania Republican primary, you saw a very large amount of Pennsylvania Republican voters from the rural part of the state, diluting what had historically been powerful blocks of votes in the suburban part of both Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And this ruralization of the Republican Party goes along with this whiter, older populace and demographic group that has and harbors these very concerns. And that's precisely the demographic group you described Tucker Carlson intentionally appeals to. Big question. Is this ruralization of the Republican Party meaning it will become more closely associated with these very potent and very potentially dangerous ideas?
It's very possible, Major. I mean, look, the rural and urban divide is an ancient one in human culture, right? It goes back a long time. People out in the country are suspicious of cities as dens of decay, and more recently of immigration. And so I think there is probably some overlap there, although ironically I think there's a sense in which the people who have the least contact with new arrivals of this country and new immigrants are the most afraid of them in some ways. But I do think that in the same way that Carlson found that versions of these toxic ideas are potent and good for ratings, there are politicians on the right, for the most part, who have found that the same versions of the same ideas are also potent for bringing in fundraising dollars and achieving clout within the Republican Party and winning elections. So I do think we'll see more of this and not less.
There's a tendency to sometimes look at someone who's popular on cable and say, well, they're popular on cable, that's not a big deal. Nicholas Confessore and your team did not. It's an important story, an important series of stories. We appreciate your time explaining them. Thanks very much.
Of course, thank you.